to be traced to the Jewish overthrow in AD 70. That final sentence is important. Brandon draws a parallel between the esoteric Jewish community at Qumran, whose books were hidden before the community was destroyed by the Romans in AD 68. Those documents are now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the community that authored them is known almost solely through them. Fairly recently those very scrolls have been made available to scholars at large, stirring great hopes for a breakthrough in our understanding of Judaism at the time of Christ and thus, early Christian development. Brandon proposes that the Romans also wiped out the Christian community in Jerusalem, which strongly maintained its ties to Judaism, in AD 70. Thus its documents were lost as a consequence of the Jewish uprising there. 76. Development of the Christian doctrine. The annihilation of the Mother Church of Jerusalem meant that the original leaders of Jewish Christianity were killed or dispersed. Also, there must have been a strong political force encouraging the moving away from Judaism and any traditions that identified a community as being tied to Judaism. These factors would have greatly aided in the strengthening and spread of non-Jewish concepts among early Christians. They would have almost certainly helped the spread of the concept of Jesus's deification, especially given the Roman custom of deifying their own leaders. Possible effect of Paul's background. We can only surmise how much of an effect Paul's background had on the development of the Christian doctrine of Jesus as God incarnate. A. N. Wilson, in his book Paul, Mind of the Apostle W. W. Norton, 1998, page 26, offers some interesting thoughts on the matter. Paul was born in Tarsus and is often referred to as Paul of Tarsus. Every year Heracles, a Greek divine hero, was honored in Tarsus by great religious ceremonies. Every autumn in Tarsus the boy Paul would have seen the great funeral pyre at which the god was ritually burnt. The central mystery of the ritual was that the withering that of the summer sun had brought the god to his death, but that he would rise to life again in the spring, at about the time when the Jews were celebrating the Passover. From inscriptions in Tarsus we know that Heracles, in his dying and descent into Hades, was regarded as a divine savior. Thus, Heracles, who had one divine parent and one human one, might possibly have served as a model for Paul in his interpretation of Jesus and his life and death. If this was the case, Paul may not even have been conscious of it. It is also possible that Wilson puts too much stress on Paul's birthplace, as in Acts 22:3 Paul indicates that he was brought up in Jerusalem. Where did the concept come from? 77. I am a Jew, born in Tarsus in Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, educated strictly according to our ancestral law, being zealous for God, just as all of you are today. Acts 22:3 New Revised Standard Version. However, the parallels between the Pauline image of Jesus as a divine Son of God, who was Savior to mankind, and her equals may be worth noting. Wilson also mentions that Tarsus was a center of Mithraic worship where initiates drank the blood of a sacrificial bull or a chalice of wine symbolizing it. Ibid. p. 25. This seems reminiscent of the wine of the Eucharist. Prior to the Nicene Councils, for over the first 300 years after the crucifixion, the nature of Jesus and his relationship to God the Father was understood in a variety of manners by different segments of the early church. There were those who believed that Jesus was just a mortal man who had a very special relationship with God. Then there were those who agreed with Theodotus of Byzantium that Jesus was born a mere man and attained the ability to work miracles at the time of his baptism. Some of Theodotus's students later believed that Jesus became God after his resurrection. And then there were those known as monarchians who believed that God and Jesus were one and the same from the beginning of time. Some believed that Jesus was created, and some of those believed that he was fully human but shared his body with the Son of God. Others who believed Jesus to be human believed he was adopted by God. Those whose understanding eventually won out believed that Jesus was fully human and fully God at the same time, as 78. Development of the Christian doctrine exemplified by the traditional doctrine of the Incarnation, as briefly discussed next. Doctrine of Incarnation. The doctrine that was codified and eventually accepted in 325 by the First Council of Nicaea is basically that Jesus Christ was the incarnation of the second person of the Trinity, and was truly God and truly a man at the same time. All other understandings were decreed to be heretical by the conference. We will examine the doctrine of the Trinity